Hi everybody, and welcome back for our review topic number 6 video, which is all about graphing and writing the equations of lines. Now, this is actually a review of a review topic. So this is actually something we learned in Unit 2, and now we've reviewed in Unit 3 again. That tells you this is a really important idea because we wouldn't be coming back to it over and over again if it wasn't really important. So, the first thing is, let's review how to write the equation of a line. There are two things that you need to know if you want to write the equation of a line. The first thing that you need to know is a point that is on the graph. And the second thing you need to know is the slope. Now, when you're identifying a point, there are two pieces of information. There is the x-coordinate of the point, and there is the y-coordinate of the point. And we usually call those x1 and y1 because that's the starting point. So the first x and the first y. Your slope is going to be your rise over run. We usually use letter m for slope, and you can find this by doing change in y divided by change in x, or by doing rise over run if you have a graph. Once you have those two pieces of information, your equation is going to look like this. Y equals, and then you're going to put your starting y value. Then you're going to have either plus or minus because it depends on whether your slope is positive or negative, and then your slope, and then parentheses x minus, and then your starting x value, which is x number 1. So let's go ahead and practice this. Now, one scenario is that I might tell you in the instructions that here's your x, and that here's your y, and that here's your slope. And if I give you all that information, all you have to do is put it all together. So you would write y equals, the first number is going to be your starting y, which in this problem is -1. Then your slope, which in this problem is -2/7. And then parentheses, x minus, and then your starting x, which is a 9. And that would be your answer. In problem number 2, instead of just telling you everything you need to know, I'm going to make you work for it a little bit. So instead of telling you your starting x, your starting y, and your slope, I'm giving you 2 points to start with, and I'm asking you to find the slope before you write the equation. One of the good strategies to use here is to make a table. So I would take the two starting points, 3, 8, and 5, 4, and put them in my table. And then I would do my change in y, which is -4, divided by my change in x, which is +2. And that number simplifies to -2. Now, I've got my starting x, and I've got my starting y, and they're in my table, and I've got my slope, and it's right here, it's -2, so now I can write my equation. Y equals my starting y value, which is 8, then -2, because that's my slope is negative, and then x minus my starting x, which is 3. Now, last but not least, if I give you a graph, the first thing I like to do is find my starting point. Now, I'm going to use this point right here as the starting point because it's the one that's farthest to the left on this graph. So my x would be -2, and my y would be -4. To get my slope, I have a couple different options. I like to do rise over run. So on this graph, the rise would be 3, and the run would be 2. So my slope would be +3/2. And now I'm ready to write my equation. Y equals my starting y, which is -4, then +3/2 because my slope is positive, parentheses x minus, and then I'm going to minus -2 because I'm minusing a negative, that becomes a +2 in my final answer. One of the other ways you can think about this is that when it comes to x, it's always the opposite of the number. So if you start with a -2 as your starting x, in the equation it should actually be a +2. Now the second thing I'm going to ask you to do with lines is I'm going to ask you to graph them. The good news is once you know where the equations come from, it makes it very easy to unpack those equations to make a good graph. Just like when we made our equations, we needed a starting point and a slope. if we want to make a graph, we're going to need a starting point and a slope. So we're going to have to figure out my starting point and my slope. Now in my equation, my starting x always went inside the parentheses next to the letter x. In this case, it's a positive 5. But like I said, when it comes to x, it's always the opposite because there's this minus built into the equation. And so the starting x here would actually be negative 5. My starting y is always the number that is not attached to x. It's sort of a free spirit floating around in there. And my slope is always the number that is multiplied by the parentheses, which in this case would be negative 4 over 3. Once I know that that's my starting point and my slope, I can go ahead and graph my starting point, which is negative 5, positive 2, and then use my slope to get more numbers. So this is going to tell me to rise by going down 4 and then run by going over 3. So down 4, over 3. My next point would be right here. Next, I would continue to do that. So go down 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, over 3, 1, 2, 3. I could also go up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, left 3, and that would give me more points that line up with my starting point and my line, and there is my graph. Now, sometimes we're going to see an equation like number 2. In problem number 2, you'll notice there is no parentheses in the equation. Now, normally I would look inside the parentheses to find the starting x, but since there's no parentheses there, my starting x is 0. My starting y is the number that is not attached to x, so in this case, that would be 3. And my slope is always the number that is multiplied by x. In this case, that would be positive 5. Now, I'm going to write positive 5 over 1 so that I can clearly see my rise and my run to make my graph easier. So my starting point here is 0, 3. Sometimes we call that the y-intercept, and that point would be graphed right here. Then I would go up 5 and then right 1, which puts me right here. I could also go down 5 and left 1, and I could continue to do that until I run out of room, and then I would have this nice straight line here. All right, that is it for your review for writing the equations and graphing the equations of lines. The next thing you're going to do is some practice.